Rain fell in fine, icy threads, painting the asphalt in dark reflective streaks. The world smelled of wet earth and gasoline, the air vibrating faintly with the distant hum of cars, each one passing as if blind to the small tragedy unfolding at the roadside. He lay there, his coat slick with mud, trembling with the shivers of fear and pain. A German shepherd, magnificent even in misery, eyes wide and pleading, fixed on the horizon as though willing someone to stop. His paws twitched in the shallow puddle where he had collapsed, the bones beneath visible in sharp, cruel relief. Something about the tilt of his head, the tiny, desperate inhale that shook his whole body, stopped me cold in the middle of the street. It was a question without words, an unspoken cry that reverberated in the hollow of the chest. The world narrowed until it was only him, only the quiet misery of a life hanging by the fragile thread of chance. Rain fell in thin, relentless sheets, splattering against the asphalt in silver streaks that reflected the dull glow of distant streetlights. I had been walking along the edge of the road, mind wandering through the fatigue of the day, when movement caught my eye. At first I thought it was a shadow, a piece of debris washed by the rain, but then I saw the shape shift. A German shepherd lay there, massive even in its weakness, soaked to the skin, trembling with a shiver that ran through every bone. His ribs protruded sharply beneath matted, mud-streaked fur, each breath a fragile struggle. And then I saw his eyes, wide, dark, pleading, glimmering with a wordless question, staring directly at me across the storm. My chest tightened as I froze in place. There was fear there, yes, the kind that warned me to hesitate, to keep my distance. But there was also something else, something that gripped me and would not let go. The unbearable clarity of helplessness. I could see the story etched into his body, the faint scars along his shoulders, the subtle wounds that suggested a life of neglect, the hollowed chest that begged for nourishment. Every detail screamed for care, and yet I paused, acutely aware that a single wrong movement might shatter whatever fragile trust remained. I swallowed hard, extending my hand slowly, tentatively, as if I could offer salvation 1 inch at a time. "It's okay," I whispered, though the words felt fragile against the pounding rain and distant hum of traffic. The shepherd's ears flattened against his skull, his head tilting slightly, nostrils flaring to test my intent. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating every sharp contour of his emaciated body. In that brief flash, the stark reality was undeniable. Survival had been a series of brutal lessons, each scar a testament to endurance, each trembling movement a reminder of fear learned too early. I knelt beside him, jacket soaked, hair plastered to my forehead, and slowly placed a hand against his side. He flinched, a reflex carved by repeated trauma, but then froze, testing me, allowing the tiniest measure of contact. A tremor ran through him, mirrored by the tightening in my chest. The world seemed to narrow to the small space between us, rain blurring the edges of the road and the distant and different city. In that silence, I could feel the pulse beneath his fur, fast and ragged, a heartbeat dangling on the edge between life and surrender. Time stretched thin. The drizzle softened, turning the puddles on the asphalt into fractured mirrors that reflected us back at each other. Every shallow breath, every slight tremble of his paw became a thread in the invisible bridge forming between us. I realized then that rescue was not simply a matter of lifting him from the street. It was a negotiation, an exchange of quiet trust. Each careful inch forward was a promise. I would not hurt him. I would not abandon him. I would honor this fragile life that fate had placed before me. His eyes flicked toward me again, and I noticed the subtle softening at their edges. The fear had not gone, but it had shifted, a small recognition that my presence was not a threat. I whispered again, letting my voice mingle with the rain. "You're not alone anymore." It felt absurdly inadequate, yet somehow the sound seemed to reach him. His head leaned slightly into the tentative pressure of my hand, and for a moment the tremor lessened, replaced by the tiniest acknowledgement of connection. The world beyond the street receded. Distant lights blurred into abstract streaks on the wet asphalt. The forested edge of the road swayed in the wind, and somewhere far off, a dog barked, fragmented and ghostly. All that mattered was this fragile creature in front of me, a life teetering between despair and hope. Lightning flashed again, revealing every muscle and bone beneath the rain-slicked coat. I could see the faint indentations where previous injuries had left their mark, and yet in those same contours, I glimpsed resilience, an unspoken declaration that despite pain, despite fear, this dog had not given up. I knelt for what felt like an eternity, letting him test me, letting him decide whether I was safe, whether the bridge between fear and trust could exist. Slowly, I began to slide my hand beneath him, feeling the tense lines of muscle and bone, the subtle warmth that clung to his soaked body. The tremors continued, but now they were tempered by a curiosity, a tentative questioning. Could this human be counted on? Inch by inch, I shifted closer, careful not to press too hard, careful not to startle. The wet earth smelled strongly of rain and mud, and the air carried the faint tang of distant smoke from the city, but all that faded in the concentrated focus of survival and trust. At last I reached a point where I could lift him slightly, supporting his frail weight with my arms. He flinched at the initial movement but quickly froze, allowing the transfer without struggle. His body pressed subtly into mine, trembling still but no longer flailing in panic. I felt his pulse against my chest, a rapid, uneven rhythm that mirrored my own accelerated heartbeat. The rain around us softened into a quiet drizzle, casting reflective silver across his wet fur. We paused together, two lives suspended in a delicate balance, a quiet acknowledgement forming between human and dog. Driving to the shelter was surreal. The car moved slowly through rain-streaked streets, headlights throwing blurred streaks across the windows. Every bump in the road elicited a tiny shiver, each jolt of his trembling mirrored in my chest. I whispered soft assurances, letting my presence be the signal of safety, letting my voice and touch become a rhythm he could trust. His eyes followed mine constantly, the silent calculation of fear, curiosity, and hope blending into every glance. The world outside blurred past, but inside that small cocoon, a bridge of trust, delicate but real, was taking shape. By the time we reached the shelter, the rain had thinned to a gentle mist. I opened the car door carefully and let him step out on his own, paw by paw, testing the ground. He hesitated, sniffed the air, and slowly adjusted his weight, each step a demonstration of cautious bravery. I followed beside him, hand lightly resting on his back, guiding without force, offering only reassurance. The tremor persisted but had softened, no longer a desperate panic but a tentative acknowledgement. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive this night. In that moment, as the mist wrapped the street and the shelter loomed ahead, I understood the fragile truth. Rescue is not merely physical, not just an act of lifting and carrying. It is patience, presence, and careful attention to every micro-expression, every breath, every subtle gesture. In his eyes, once wide with terror, I saw a glimmer of possibility. And in mine, he had found the first spark of trust. Together, we had the chill of the night had seeped into my bones, clinging like the persistent drizzle that still fell over the streets. The shepherd sat trembling beside me in the car, his chest rising and falling unevenly, each breath a fragile echo of fear. I reached out slowly, fingers brushing against his soaked, matted fur. The first contact made him flinch sharply, ears pinning back, muscles tightening, body stiff as a taut wire. His eyes searched mine, wide and uncertain, silently asking, "Can I trust you?" I whispered softly, "It's okay, I'm here," though I knew my words were fragile, almost meaningless against the weight of his terror. We stepped carefully out of the car, the rain having softened to a gentle drizzle, mud sucking at our shoes and paws. Each movement had to be deliberate, a negotiation between instinct and reassurance. One wrong step, one sudden motion, and the fragile trust might shatter entirely. He paused frequently, nose twitching at the air, ears flicking tail low, muscles taut with alertness. I slowed my breathing, matching his rhythm, offering nothing but steady presence. Inch by inch, we began the first steps of rescue, the quiet agreement forming between us. I would not hurt him, and he might allow himself to be helped. In a small clearing by the roadside, I knelt and gently slid an arm beneath him, feeling the sharp contours of ribs and taut muscles. His body stiffened at first, then froze, and after a long, tense moment, he allowed me to support his weight. Rain whispered through the trees, carrying the earthy smell of wet soil, mingling with distant, ghostly dog barks. The trembling that had consumed his body slowly shifted, its rhythm becoming less frantic, more measured, a cautious acknowledgement of safety. Each heartbeat I felt through his body mirrored my own, a shared rhythm of fear, trust, and tentative hope. Once inside the car, I draped a coat over his drenched body, careful to cover him without pressing too hard against his ribs or shoulders. His trembling continued, but it softened. The movement no longer panicked but subtle, measured shivers that seemed almost like relief. Each bump of the car elicited a faint reaction, every turn another test of patience, but he began to lean slightly into my touch. I murmured reassurances, soft words repeated over and over, not expecting him to understand, but hoping he would feel the intention behind them. The world outside blurred into streaks of streetlights and rain-streaked glass. Inside that small, warm space, I watched him study me with careful, skeptical eyes. Every twitch of his ears, every subtle shift of weight, was a question I answered with patience and presence. Slowly, I felt the first fragile bridge of trust forming. A slight lean, a relaxed paw, a faint sigh. All signals that the line between fear and tentative safety was beginning to take shape. He was teaching me in these silent gestures how to be trusted, and I was learning how to show that I deserved it. The car rumbled softly over puddles and uneven pavement, headlights casting shifting reflections across his fur and the wet interior. Each motion, each jolt I mirrored with my own careful, deliberate gestures, hand resting lightly on his side, whispering, softening, offering stability. At times his trembling returned, sharper, sparked by memory or instinct, and I held my hand steady, a lifeline without words. Every movement mattered, every hesitation mattered. Trust was earned one careful, patient act at a time. By the time we reached the shelter, the rain had tapered to a fine mist, and the world outside felt softer, gentler, almost forgiving. I opened the car door slowly, allowing him to step out on his own, paw by paw, testing the solid ground. He hesitated, sniffed the damp air, adjusted his stance, every move deliberate, every glance wary yet curious. I followed, hand lightly resting on his back, guiding without force, offering only the calm promise of presence. The tremors that had dominated his body began to soften further, no longer frantic, but subtle, cautious, controlled. We walked toward the shelter at a measured pace, each step a small victory, each blink and tail flick a milestone of trust. He allowed me to guide him without struggle, following my movements with tentative confidence, responding to my gentle touch. I realized then that rescue was more than physical action. It was emotional labor, attention to subtle micro-expressions, to every flick of the ears, every tension in muscle, every tiny breath. Patience, presence, and awareness had become my tools. Trust the fragile bridge I was building inch by inch. The drizzle continued, carrying the earthy smell of renewal, the subtle rustle of wet leaves, and the faint distant hum of life continuing beyond our bubble. I felt the weight of responsibility, but also a strange exhilaration. This was more than survival. It was connection. His body leaned into mine for brief moments, subtle acknowledgments that my presence could be relied upon, that my touch would not hurt, that the future might hold safety instead of fear. His trembling had not vanished entirely, but it had transformed, becoming a rhythm of cautious trust, a heartbeat signaling tentative hope. Finally, as we reached the shelter doors, he paused, paw lifted mid-step, eyes tracking me. I knelt, brushing wet fur from his ears, whispering soft encouragements. In his gaze, I saw the faintest spark of something I had been waiting for. Curiosity, recognition, a willingness to begin. The rain had not fully ceased, but the air felt lighter, the world more forgiving. I realized, in that quiet moment, that rescue was not an act of speed or force. It was measured, deliberate, and profoundly intimate. It was learning to be trusted and learning to deserve that trust in return. In those trembling hands, in every careful step, in every hesitant glance, I understood something essential. Survival was only part of the story. True rescue was emotional, a slow construction of connection and safety, and patience was its foundation. He had begun to accept it, and in accepting it, he had begun to reclaim something even more vital than life itself: hope. Taken the first step across a bridge that might just lead us both back from the shadows. The morning air carried the subtle, earthy scent of wet soil and new beginnings. The rain from the night before had left everything damp but alive. The leaves glistened, small puddles mirrored the pale sunlight, and the wind whispered gently through the trees. The shepherd sat beside me in the shelter's small yard, paws muddy, fur still damp. But the tremor that had dominated him the night before had softened into quiet awareness. His dark eyes followed every movement I made, watching, learning, questioning, yet no longer filled with panic. There was a fragile balance now, a trust delicately earned but still tentative. I crouched beside him, hand hovering just above his damp fur. He didn't flinch this time. Instead, he leaned slightly into my presence, as if testing the edges of a new understanding. Every muscle seemed to relax fractionally, his weight shifting subtly as if willing himself to feel safe. I spoke softly, my voice blending with the rustle of leaves and the distant city hum. "You don't have to be afraid, not anymore." The words hung in the air, not as commands or promises, but as invitations, an acknowledgement that his world could shift, that fear didn't have to be constant. For the first time, I could study him without seeing only survival instinct or trauma. His ears flicked at distant sounds, nose twitching at new smells, paws flexing in curiosity. Small movements that had once signaled panic now suggested interest, awareness, and, slowly, engagement. I offered him my hand again, slowly this time, deliberately, letting him decide whether to trust it. He sniffed, paused, and then pressed his head against my palm, a quiet gesture of acceptance. It was small yet monumental. The first conscious choice to allow connection, a bridge forming over the shadow of neglect. The yard itself became part of our dialogue. Puddles reflected both the sky and his cautious glances. Fallen leaves clung to his wet fur, each sound beneath his paws registering with acute attention. The shelter's walls were quiet, offering safety, but the world beyond remained vivid, threatening, yet full of potential. Every breath he took, every shift of his weight, every subtle glance conveyed information. Curiosity laced with hesitation. I mirrored him, moving slowly, letting him match my rhythm until our presence became a shared language, wordless but understood. I knelt fully now, letting him press against my side. He leaned in, trembling only slightly, a reminder of the fragility still embedded in him. My hand moved in slow, circular motions along his damp fur, and I felt the tension melting just a fraction. The bridge was growing, built not by force, but by patience, observation, and gentle consistency. Every small movement, paw stretched, tail lifted slightly, ears upright, became evidence that he was learning to navigate trust, that he could feel safety without surrendering all caution. In those moments, the surrounding world blurred into insignificance. The dripping of rain from the eaves, distant traffic, birds beginning their morning calls, all faded into a backdrop for this delicate ballet of connection. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the way his muscles relaxed in patterns almost imperceptible, the tiny sighs as if confirming internally that this new reality could be tolerated, perhaps even embraced. The quiet bond between us deepened not with words or grand gestures, but through stillness, attentiveness, and shared patience. I extended a leash gently, letting it rest lightly on the damp ground beside him. No sudden pull, no expectation, just an invitation. He regarded it cautiously, nose twitching, tail low but wagging slightly. I allowed a long pause, breathing evenly, letting him consider it on his terms. Then, with a soft sniff, he nudged it, pressing his paw against the material. Slowly, he allowed me to attach it, each step deliberate, showing willingness to engage in this new form of guidance. That small act, the first conscious compliance, was a quiet victory, a symbol that he was beginning to accept that humans could be allies, not threats. We began to walk the yard together, each step deliberate, measured, a choreography of understanding. I watched him test the ground, sniffing at the damp earth, pausing at the soft rustle of leaves. His tail lifted fractionally, a subtle sign that curiosity was emerging alongside caution. I mirrored his pace, letting him set the rhythm, offering reassurance through proximity rather than commands. Each step was a lesson in patience, for both of us. He was learning to trust, I was learning to observe, and together, a quiet bond was forming, one anchored in mutual respect and careful presence. As the morning sun broke through the clouds, spilling soft golden light across the yard, the shepherd began to relax further. He rolled slightly onto his side, paw outstretched, eyes half closed, a faint rumble of contentment vibrating in his chest. My hand rested gently on his side, feeling the slow, even beat of his heart. In that serene moment, I realized that rescue was no longer about survival alone. It was about rebuilding confidence, teaching patience, and allowing space for trust to grow. Every small action, every gentle touch, every pause of silence contributed to a slow, steady healing process. We remained together in that yard for hours, each moment reinforcing the quiet bond. I spoke softly, letting him hear human warmth without pressure, letting him explore without fear of sudden movement. His paws sank slightly into the damp earth as he shifted closer to me, leaning gently against my side, trusting enough to let his presence be intertwined with mine. And I, in turn, allowed myself to become fully present, each breath and movement conscious, each gesture deliberate, knowing that patience was as vital as shelter or food. By midday, the tremors were barely noticeable. His tail had begun to wag in subtle, exploratory arcs. Eyes that had once flickered constantly with terror now followed me with cautious attention, softening with curiosity. He lifted his head to sniff the air, then returned his gaze to me as if silently acknowledging the fragile growing bond. The world beyond the yard was still vast, unpredictable, and potentially threatening. Yet here, in this quiet moment, trust had begun to take root. The rain had left behind a reflective sheen on the ground, shimmering puddles catching the soft sunlight. Each reflection mirrored our slow, deliberate progress, not just in physical rescue, but in emotional healing. I felt an almost sacred responsibility, knowing that every gentle touch, every patient pause, every moment of stillness contributed to rebuilding a life that had known too much fear. And in that moment, the shepherd's tentative acceptance became more than survival. It became the quiet promise of a bond that could endure. The morning had given way to afternoon, and the sun now peeked through a thinning layer of clouds, casting warm patches of light across the damp yard. The shepherd moved cautiously beside me, paws sinking slightly into the soft earth, nostrils flaring with each new scent. The tremor that had haunted him during the night had mostly faded, replaced by a tentative rhythm of confidence. His dark eyes scanned the surroundings, alert but no longer dominated by fear. He walked beside me now rather than behind, testing boundaries, beginning to claim the space as his own, and I realized that something profound was happening. Courage, born from patience and trust, was rising in him. I knelt briefly to adjust the leash, letting him settle into a calm stance. The small deliberate gestures of care, the gentle rub of fur, soft murmurs of reassurance and absence of force, were now being reflected back in his posture. His head lifted slightly, tail brushing the ground but moving in subtle arcs, ears flicking forward with curiosity. He paused mid-step to sniff at a puddle, then glanced at me as if seeking permission to explore. That glance held no panic, only cautious inquiry, and I felt a surge of recognition. This was the first conscious exercise of his own agency, an early act of courage sparked by our shared trust. We began moving toward the small field behind the shelter, where the grass was still wet and scattered with leaves. Every step he took was careful, measured, deliberate, as if testing the limits of safety and possibility. I let him take the lead, my hands light on the leash, my voice soft and calm. The world had not changed. There were sounds of distant traffic, rustling branches, the faint hum of human activity in the city beyond the trees. Yet here in this small domain, the shepherd began to assert his presence, lifting his nose high, sniffing freely, ears erect and attentive, the subtle tremor almost gone. He paused at a shallow puddle, staring into the reflective water, then glanced back at me. The connection between us was now palpable, a quiet conversation expressed in glances, pauses, and shared breath. I knelt beside him, letting my palm rest on his damp fur, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart. Every heartbeat seemed to echo resilience, each movement an act of defiance against the fear that had once dominated his life. He lowered his head to the ground, sniffing, testing, exploring, and for the first time I could see a spark of confidence in the way he navigated the world, a rising courage that had been nurtured through care and patience. Every glance, every subtle nudge, every shared breath reflected a bond forged through patience, gentleness, and unwavering presence. In that quiet communion, I felt a deep sense of completion, not merely in the act of rescue, but in the emotional journey that had carried us both from fear and hesitation to trust and mutual respect. As the sun dipped lower, casting a soft golden glow over the yard, I noticed him lifting his head, tail brushing against the ground in tentative arcs, muscles relaxed yet attentive. His gaze shifted toward the horizon, eyes catching the fading light, reflecting a sense of awareness and contemplation. The subtle courage that had emerged in the morning now manifested in a quiet pride, a calm recognition of his own agency and resilience. He was no longer just a survivor. He had become a being capable of choosing presence over panic, connection over isolation. We walked back toward the shelter, slow and deliberate, enjoying the tactile richness of the wet earth beneath our feet, the soft whisper of the wind, and the gentle hum of distant life. He followed closely, yet with space to explore, his tail held higher than before, ears erect but relaxed, movements fluid and unrestrained. Every step reinforced the bridge between us, the bond that had evolved from tentative trust into a profound, wordless companionship. I spoke softly, murmuring reassurances not out of necessity, but as a reflection of gratitude for the courage that had grown within him, and for the bond that had allowed it to flourish. Finally, we reached a quiet corner of the yard, a patch of soft grass touched by the last rays of sunlight. He paused, sniffed the ground, and then turned to me, eyes meeting mine with an expression that conveyed something beyond comprehension: acceptance, connection, gratitude, and resilience. I knelt and gently ran my hand along his side, feeling the subtle warmth and strength beneath the damp fur. In that instant, the journey of fear, trembling, and tentative trust culminated in a single, perfect equilibrium. The shepherd was safe, present, and emotionally whole in a way that had once seemed impossible. I whispered softly, letting the words dissolve into the soft hum of the evening. "You are home now. You are safe. You are free to trust, free to explore, free to be." His ears flicked at my voice, tail wagged slowly, and he leaned slightly into my hand, the smallest gesture, yet one that carried the weight of the journey we had undertaken together. The storm, both literal and emotional, had passed. What remained was a quiet sanctuary, a moment of connection forged through patience, presence, and unwavering care. As the golden light faded into a gentle dusk, the shepherd lay down beside me, chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. The trembling that had once defined his nights was gone, replaced by a calm vigilance and quiet contentment. We remained there together, the soft rustle of the wind through the trees, the distant call of a bird, the subtle hum of the city beyond, all blending into a serene symphony that framed our shared peace. In that stillness, I understood fully that rescue is not merely a moment, but a process, a journey, and ultimately, a bridge to hope and emotional resilience. And as the last light of day touched his glistening fur, I saw in his eyes the final reflection of the journey we had endured together, a journey from fear to courage, from trembling hands to steady presence, from isolation to connection. In that quiet golden moment, the shepherd and I shared the profound, unspoken truth of survival. That trust can be rebuilt, courage can rise, and love, patience, and care can heal even the most fractured soul.